Hello and welcome to Lending to Ex-Offenders, Developing Educational Content and Partnerships. I would now like to turn the conference over to Grady Hedgestaff at the SBA. Please go ahead.
Hi, everyone. This is Grady Hedgestaff, and thank you for joining us last in our series of three. I call them introductory webinars in lending to ex-offenders. With the new rule that we put into place this year that allows us through our microloan program to lend to parolees and probationers, this is really going to be a focus of ours for all of this fiscal year, helping our intermediaries and stakeholders make the most of this new responsibility and opportunity that we have in our marketplace. We have been delighted to have Greg Fairchild and Tierney Fairchild, who have tremendous expertise in this area, bring us along and benefit from their learnings to help us get a jump start on what are the issues and opportunities that do face us as a lending community as we try to figure out how best to work with folks who are re-entering our communities. They've had two very informative sessions. There's been lively interchange with you who've been participating, and we will have this as well as the other two webinars available for those who might have missed it that you're aware of, who you want to pass this on to. We will be sending you links to those after today's session. But without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to the Fairchilds, and thank you again for giving us the benefit of what you've learned in working with these populations. It's been extremely valuable, and I know today will be just as well.
So we want to thank you, Grady, the SBA, for giving us this opportunity to connect with so many who are involved in the day-to-day realities of lending to small business owners and who are increasingly, if not already, interested in lending to probationers and parolees. What we want to do today in the third of our time periods is really talk to you about the opportunities that are currently available, but also the future opportunities in terms of educating and providing technical assistance to potential lendees to your firms, to your funds. Next slide, please. So in our first session, which hopefully many of you were able to attend, and if you weren't, the sessions are available for a review, we spent time talking about entrepreneurial reentry. These are programs that exist around the country. They are dedicated to the question of how one might prepare ex-offenders for their reentry into society with a specific focus on entrepreneurship. There are many, many reentry programs, but relatively few have been created that focus on entrepreneurial reentry, and those that are in existence are less than 10 years in age. In our second session, we talked about lessons we learned from how one recruits and selects individuals. These were recruitment and selection for educational programs, but these would be the types of recruitment and selection questions that might come up if one were thinking again about lendees for small business development programs. And let it just be said that the care and concern that one takes in deciding among ex-offenders who's really ready to have the assistance you're there to provide is an important consideration, and that's really what we ended up talking about in that session. Today we're going to move the lens a little bit more to the areas of how one might think about constructing technical assistance. This has been the area where we have spent a good body of our time and a good body of our expertise. We're both educators by training. And we spent a good bit of time thinking about how you produce content, how you deliver it, and in what places and with whom. And so we'll be talking about those things as we proceed. One thing that's important, those of you listening today may be organizations whose expertise isn't in educating, and you provide an opportunity for partnerships with educators or educational institutions to do the types of collaborative work that would lead to more value for those who you're working with. I think let's proceed to the next slide. So throughout, as we've done in prior webinars, we're going to do this again. We're going to ask questions, and here's one of them that you see here. We're going to ask the assistance of Tegan from AT&T to help us out. But what we'd like to do is we'd like those of you on the webinar to look at the question that we have. What's the name of the educational funding stream that was recently reinstated for ex-offenders? This, by the way, is some of what Mr. Hedgespeth was talking about earlier. And here are your choices: Perkins loans, 529 plans, Pell Grants, PLUS loans, Federal Supplemental Education Opportunity Grants. Okay, so there are about 50 people on the webinar. Tegan, could you give us a sense of which answer was the most common?
Sure.
So what's interesting here, and I wonder if this reflects in some ways the audience, both Federal Supplemental Education Opportunity Grants as well as Pell Grants were the first two choices. They represented 4 out of 10 responses that we received. By the way, many didn't respond at all. Well, the answer here is actually Pell Grants. And Pell Grants are educational grants provided for college education that was something that was available to low-income people for years. But in 1993, this access was eliminated for ex-offenders or prisoners. What would be your thoughts on the reason these funds were eliminated? This isn't a poll, it's an open-ended question. So perhaps some of you might use your notes function and tell us what you think some of the reasons might be. So we have the first thought that in 1993 there may have been a change in political leadership that led to this change. That could be. And we certainly know that when political leadership changes, that there happen also to be changes in numbers of policies based on the decisions that are made at that time. But that answer, while perhaps intriguing, doesn't get to perhaps some of the reasons why. So we have a second, that education prisoners wasn't viewed as something that would be done because prisoners would return to prison. This is from Kevin Morehouse. The thought here is that the notion about access to benefits that for people that were incarcerated at the time was something that, as a country, we were leaning in on, feeling that this was not the way people should spend our government dollars. I think as time has gone on, there's been some recognition that, and we talked about this in our last webinar, that with increased education comes less likelihood of recidivating. And so what appeared to be just a great benefit, that is people who were incarcerated having the opportunity to get great education, turns out that while that seemed like a private benefit, it, in second reflection, is a public benefit. Providing educational services while someone's in corrections might do a better job of correcting them. And so, I'm going to turn it over, and we're going to go to the next slide.
I'll just add on Greg's point there, this is Tierney, that in fact in 1993, yes, led by a senator from Texas and others, there was a recognition that Pell Grants actually are given to those that have some of the least amounts of income to supplement their education, and so prisoners would often be able to access that because of the very, very low income that they would be making. And so, yes, I would say perhaps the political tide turned, but that there was a sense at the time that there would be more access for a certain population, that would be those people in prison, than there might be for other people who were hardworking out trying to make it in regular society, if you will. So the fortunate aspect of this is now we do have them reinstated, so that many people from all different parts of our country can access education and the benefits that they might need to further their education, this population included. So moving on to the next slide. Just to review the challenge, that many of you probably have been with us for these 3 webinars, and we're very pleased that you have, but for those that may be joining for the first time, we're talking about a population of 4.75 million, almost 5 million people on probation or parole right now, 650,000 being released every year, and that's about 10,000 every week. And I certainly know that here in the state of Virginia, where we're located, that our state is talking about the release of certain ex-offenders for certain crimes that may be categorized from felonies to misdemeanors, and that has happened in California and some other states as well. So we may see more people being released. We talked a little bit about this last time. But either way, I think what the data will show, and research from the Pew Fund and others would show that recidivism rates are too high. The data that, this varies again by state and by population, but about 2/3 will be rearrested in 3 years, within 3 years. And the annual cost to imprison often surpass a college tuition. There was a study done, an Atlantic article in 2011 that noted that Princeton University cost at the time, just tuition alone, $37,000. And in New York, the state prison annual cost of incarceration was $44,000. So, the shift, as Greg mentioned earlier, from a recognition that, yes, we are incarcerating, but we also may be spending that time rehabilitating, using those monies that we are using for the cost of incarcerating people, we can also support education. And most importantly, support their reentry into the economic mainstream. And we have talked about how much education has reduced recidivism, and in fact, those numbers are significant. So that's the challenge that we have. Next slide, please. In the last session, we tried to link the notion that we're creating some credit-worthy profiles, but the credit-worthiness among ex-offenders is a significant challenge. And I'm going to turn this back over to Greg for a brief discussion about how the things that you may look for as lenders, how the ex-offender population may be stacking up.
Credit scoring works differently by financial institution, and essentially there are many different ways you evaluate credit for those that come into your organizations looking for funding. Our sense is that, I think all of us know, they can often be boiled down to essentially what are known as the 5 C's. Again, there may be some variance, but some things to think about when thinking about ex-offenders that might make them a little different than other populations include some of the following. First, if you were looking at credit history, you would be dealing with a population who may have negative, limited, or no information about past credit history. Some offenders have been incarcerated since before they reached the age of discretion, before they became 18. Some ex-offenders have been out of the financial services marketplace for literally years or sometimes decades. And then during the period in which they were on the outside, they may have behaved in ways that gave them negative credit ratings and negative financial histories. Likewise, there may be a challenge that certain folks may have around debt. These debts, in a capital sense, would be debts including child support. Child support for ex-offenders is measured on a cumulative basis, and so not only if someone has a monthly child support payment, but if they've been incarcerated for, 5 years, they have 40 months of child support that they must pay back. There's also restitution for those involved in property crimes. And then I think it's not well known by many, but cost of court. Oftentimes if you've ever had a traffic violation or an automobile violation, a moving violation, you've had to pay cost of court. The same costs are actually applied in criminal cases and felonies. They differ, sometimes substantially, even within a state. The point is that ex-offenders will often have not one, not two, but all three of these that they have as debts they must pay on release. And sometimes these figures can run into 6 figures, the amount of the debt. Next, there's the capacity issues, that many ex-offenders will be in a first hired, first fired situation. This is entirely separate from whether they do good work. Just someone who has been recently hired is more vulnerable in a changing job market than someone that isn't. Not only that, the businesses that they may have been trained to work in, landscaping, even some businesses around catering, these are businesses that may have seasonal aspects to them. They may be viable businesses, but they may have seasonal aspects to them that have to be considered. In collateral, this relates to the capital issue, but again, many ex-offenders, not surprisingly, may have few, if any, assets. And finally, the character. Character is the most squishy of the concepts to quantify when doing a credit score. But certainly the lenders on the phone, as microlenders and small business assistance folks, you know that arm's length or lending that involves working with people is in fact what you do. It's also just important to know that when part of one's character story involves a felony or years spent behind bars, for some that will be hard to explain. In our work, we find that it's very important to encourage ex-offenders to have a story, to be open about what they've done, to be and present themselves as having recognized the extent of the harm they may have caused, and to be comfortable in talking about what they've done to change their lives, to rectify it. We feel that the scarlet letter, the felony, is important, but it doesn't have to determine what will happen for them in the future. Next slide.
So what can you do to build credit worthiness? We as educators, obviously, we're here talking about the ways in which you can educate people to build their credit worthiness. What can that education do? Well, there are many options available to inmates while they are serving their sentences. The first and foremost of those is getting their GED, their graduate equivalency diploma. And here they're also measuring reading and math levels, and those would be very important in making sure that people are able to hold jobs and eventually perhaps start their own businesses. Vocational certificates. This varies by correctional institution. We serve some people in a men's facility where they have access to vocational certificates, but they're only allowed to get one every 5 years. Whereas at the women's facility, they have access to vocational certificates, a variety of trades, and they are allowed to do as many during their stay as they may like and are able to finish. But these do provide people access to, and you as thinking about lenders, an understanding of their readiness to do a trade, whether that's heating and air conditioning, plumbing, that could be cosmetology, and we know that in our facilities that we serve here in Virginia, people, while they are incarcerated, can apply and receive their state licenses. So there's that. There's the journeyman's license. There are business software licenses and CAD even. So it really varies by institution, but those vocational certificates can be very important in determining both someone's ability to make it through such a program, but also the kinds of skills and trade readiness, as we would call it, so that they can prove that, in fact, they're very knowledgeable in the work that they're doing, and they're ready for employment. The final area of validating credentials is one that we really focus on in our work, and that's business and financial certificates. And these can be given and are very helpful as somebody's looking at whether it's an employer, a lender, or landlord. These can provide confidence and an entree for the type of service that some ex-offender might be looking for. So, for instance, in our programs, which we'll be getting to in a moment, we do provide, while non-credited, a certificate of completion, whether it's a certificate of entrepreneurship or a certificate of personal financial literacy. These come with a credential from the University of Virginia Darden School, and these are able to, we feel are very rigorous programs, and we work on trying to ensure that whoever's looking at those credentials will have the confidence that our students really understand and know the material that they are putting forth. So most importantly, I think what we're talking about here is education is an opportunity for people to demonstrate their determination, perseverance, and follow-through, those elements of character that Greg talked about just a moment ago. And most importantly as well, we really think it's very important that education can produce a level of confidence in people who otherwise may have had a lot of difficult circumstances in their lives and are dealing with a lot of challenges, from substance abuse to the shame of the offense that they may have committed, just the time that they have been incarcerated. And so we believe that education is a really clear path to both building the knowledge base and demonstrating determination, but also promoting confidence.
I'm going to add something that is an observation that we've had since we've been doing this work. And the observation is that many of the folks we work with have two things that they talk about this type of educational opportunity. The first is that, many to say that the education they had in years past was either of low quality, or they mentioned that the education they had in the past was something that they felt they had a difficult time understanding in terms of its importance. What that means is that we have students who, in many cases, are really returning to an educational environment with a very different set of eyes. Their past education, I can't say whether it's poor or not, but they seem to attest to the idea that not only are they really ready, but that ready to learn, but that this type of learning on business, entrepreneurship, education, negotiations, the type of thing we teach in our programs, they tell us that this type of education seems more immediately useful and to have high utility in a way that they may not have felt about their education in years past. And so I think for those of you on the phone who've either had this experience yourself or thinking about this type of educational opportunity, it might be easy to think, well, you're dealing with a set of individuals who have a hard time locking in, have a hard time engaging with the educational process. And I would just say to you that because we're dealing with folks who have made up their minds to do something different, and because the education is coming to them in a time in their lives where they're ready to apply it, we feel like the education that they have is much more useful. Next slide. So here's another question in the poll. Assuming that an ex-offender has a GED, what type of educational certificate might be most beneficial to them, especially if they're coming in as a loan applicant? So the examples we have here include some of the educational programs that we do, but also the educational programs you'll find in most corrections facilities. Our choices are a financial literacy educational certificate, a vocational certificate. That would be something like automobile repair or something like, as we said, cosmetology, any of the trades that are often taught in prisons, perhaps entrepreneurship, perhaps a larger set of business skills that might be applied in the workplace, even if someone wasn't owning their own business. And finally, all of the above. Bob Newman has logged in and let us know that he says it's E, all of the above. So all of the above, a resounding win. Now, looks like one person mentioned 2%. I'm sorry, mentioned financial literacy, and one person mentioned vocational certificates or trades. Well, all of the above was mentioned by half of you, and we'll tell you that we believe that's correct. We'll tell you that our educational programs aren't offered until we do not offer our financial literacy, our entrepreneurship, or our business skills training unless someone has already shown an interest, effort, and completion of some vocational education. Why do we do that? Well, we feel like vocational training, again, we feel that someone who knows a lot about welding, someone who knows someone about something that can be applied as a trade, is well prepared to create their own firm that might offer that trade. We also feel like that's a person who's made, again, some positive steps that they can build on. And the vocational trade might get them their first job. Meanwhile, the financial literacy may keep them out of financial difficulty. The business skills may help them be a better employee, and the entrepreneurship training may lead them to have their own firm. I'll take as a question, perhaps there are other educational programs that some of you on the line might suggest for someone who wants to secure a loan. So, Linda Nelson. Linda suggests soft skills, such as looking people in the eye, being on time, dressed for the part, and so on. Linda, we certainly would agree. What I should tell you is that soft skills are a part of what we do in our business skills training. We do a lot of negotiating and that sort of thing. And we'll talk about that as we go along. Keith McBride writes in and says how to understand and interpret credit reports and scores. Keith, actually one of the things we do in our financial literacy sequence is we actually ask everyone to fill out their FICO credit report forms. They get their FICO scores back. And we actually have a case study. We actually have a session that specializes in FICO scores. We'll talk about both Linda and Keith's suggestion as we go along. Next slide. We'll keep going to the next slide, but while we're talking, I'll let you know Rodney Evans has mentioned public speaking, and this is no question. In fact, public speaking, negotiating, and customer service are all a part of our Foundations of Business program, lots of presentations to groups. We're going to go on now.
So, the rest of our time today, before we talk about partnerships, we're going to spend a little time talking about the programs that we have designed that we believe will help people gain the skills that are necessary for the types of opportunities, be they in employment opportunities or entrepreneurial opportunities that we think are out there, including the types of opportunities that you may have with this new SBA rule. In our nonprofit, it's called Resilience Education, we offer a suite of entrepreneurial reentry programs, and I think the answers that we received on these other skills that are important, thank you for those that were able to send in a note, because I think they are all really fundamental to these three programs: Foundations of Business, Personal Finance, and Entrepreneurship. When we finish each of these programs, our participants receive a certificate from the Darden School of Business and Resilience Education, and this allows them to participate, to have something which they value greatly, and that they can put on their resume, show to an employer, really a credential that we hope is validating for them and confidence building, as we've said before. Next slide, please. So what are we trying to accomplish? Well, you know, a lot of these, while you are lenders and you may be thinking about small business loans, we're really, our programs are centered around helping people understand education about how business systems work. How can you be a better employee? And that might mean really delving into how businesses operate, what the business leader might be facing, the owner might be facing. Many people that are going out and re-entering are joining small businesses. They're not going to necessarily work for a large corporation. And so when we think about, you know, how can they contribute to the overall picture, think about how can they be a better employee. And so employment is the priority, then entrepreneurship is the way we like to think about it. And part of this is because, Greg can speak to this more, but really in the entrepreneurship field, only 1 in 10 people in the professional domain will become business owners. And so while we're preparing them for startup and acquiring capital, once you do decide, we feel like one of the most important things that we can do is give them that aperture, give them that lens of understanding an organization from its operations to its location, to its marketing, servicing of its customers or clients, developing of its product, and ultimately turning a profit and growing. And in our case, we also feel like it's absolutely essential that people, before they're able to really go into entrepreneurship, are really creating their own financial stability. We think that it's essential, and that's why our suite of programs includes the personal finance course, because you may have to manage through those personal challenges at the same time that you are working, going to college, handling your family, running a business eventually. So being able to have financial stability and plan for your own personal financial stability is essential. And that's really a building block to further education, to employment and promotion, and to entrepreneurship. Next slide, please. So we're going to talk a little bit about our three programs. I'll turn it over to Greg for this first one, and then I'll step in on the next.
So, you know, our first program we call Foundations of Business, and you'll see here the range of topics that are covered. Each of these topics is done in a case study method. That is, the students are given a problem. It might, for example, be a problem involving questions of how to deal with cash flows within a firm over time. The example that we use is a company that's growing, it's growing quickly, and the owners have to reorder before their actual revenues come in. They've taken orders, but they must reorder new supplies and begin production. And so even though they have customers, they actually have a cash flow problem. That's one example, and all of our materials are done where we give a problem and then we have students in the room discuss the problem, and we guide that discussion to come to a solution. When I said earlier this is a novel way of being educated for many of the people in our rooms, we don't lecture to them about cash flow. We ask them to think through and solve the problems on their own. One of the things we do is we train on how to deliver this type of material in this way. You'll see the other range of topics. They include things like interviewing skills, some of the topics you all brought up in your notes to us earlier. We talk about things like being resilient. We also have them do course deliverables. They have to present a transition plan. How will they transition from their current state to their new state? And then they also have to write a paper, which is a reflection on what they've learned over their time that they've been in the program. And so we try to build not only public speaking skills, but writing skills as well. Next slide.
And just to add in on that, this issue of perseverance and resilience, that's both that we really challenge people, and we can talk a little bit about how we do that in the classroom. But I think it's very important that we're also having people go through these business problems and solving these cases and really thinking about some of the challenges of being an employee in the workforce. And so we're hoping for them that they're understanding that there's more than one solution and path to solving a problem, but that they need to think critically and they need to connect with other people. They might need to check in with someone and get some guidance and advice, but they certainly need not to give up and recognize that, we all have challenges in the workplace and we all are managing, sometimes very pressing issues, and that doesn't always make for the most pleasant environment, but we all have to make sure that we're working together for the good of, whatever work that we're trying to accomplish. And so we try to include that of understanding how to persevere and be resilient in the face of challenges. When we think about financial literacy, we talk about it as financial capability, and we do that because we really think that it's important for people to build both, understand the financial products that are out there, but also build an understanding of how to budget and how to save, how to build their own capability of all the varieties of ways that one might engage in and with financial institutions and utilizing those institutions and those products for their benefit and not getting wrapped up, for instance, in things like payday loans or title loans that we now know are so popular. So we do a lot of work in this particular course of helping people calculate just what percentage rates those payday type of loans come with, the hundreds of percentage rates that actually are gouging into the hard work that they may have, the hard-earned money that they may have. So, we really try to focus on budgeting and banking under realizing that some of our students may be underbanked. They may not have a good understanding of how the banking system works. They may never have had a debit card or a credit card. We talk about those credit cards, particularly we talk about secured credit cards now, about building credit, and we talk about cell phone plans, so unmasking the notion of, how do you select a plan, whether it's for yourself or for multiple people in your family. We have a set of cases around car loans. One is called our protagonist, Reggie, needs a new car. He's trying to get to work. How does Reggie obtain that car given the challenges that he may have in his credit or his past, and where is he going and how is he going to be able to pay that car off? We have a case on a woman named Tamara, and she's just a widow who is trying to move and wants to buy a home. So those are the types of things, including healthcare. We talk about the new healthcare law, which has actually been very illuminating to our students, education and college funding, and then this issue of identity theft and FICO scores. We mentioned this the last time, but you may not know that many people who are incarcerated can become victims of identity theft. That's a very significant issue, and so we have a case on that. One of our students actually that was released did have her identity stolen, but this FICO score is also very essential. At the end of this particular course, we ask people to develop a personal financial plan. We ask them to develop SMART goals about their personal finances and to develop a budget upon release. This is where they're really factoring in some of those court costs and things like restitution, but they're also trying to figure out what am I going to be able to make and what do those jobs entail? And often at the end of this course, we find that many people are thinking much more about savings as well. And then we have a final case exam about a woman who really wants to go on vacation, but she may not be able to afford to do so, and she has a number of things going on in her life that may present that opportunity, but also present those challenges. And we ask them to bring all of their learning together to tell us how they would solve this problem for this particular person, Carla. Next slide, please.
So our last program that we want to talk about, although this is the program we've taught the longest, is our entrepreneurship program. And the learning objectives here involve lots of questions that could overlap with some of the things we've talked about in our other programs, but also really involve some questions around why should you become an entrepreneur, where you might locate. You can see the list there. What we've tried to do is spend less time on being inspiring about being an entrepreneur and spend more time on understanding some tools, some frameworks that might be important if one were thinking of having their own business, especially someone who already has been trained in a technical field, again, like auto repair or any of the vocational educational things we talked about earlier. What we've also tried to do is, back to presentations, is we really require a detailed written business plan and a presentation of that business plan. We have a math exam. We do math tutoring and math testing throughout our programs because math is so important in everyday business. We also provide a final exam where we really review all the concepts that we've taught throughout the educational program.
So this is another one, Tegan, we'd like a quick poll, please. This relates to our teaching, and what we're asking is which ancient philosopher believed in human reasoning and used questioning to compel audiences to think through problems to their logical conclusions? The first answers that you have are Plato, Socrates, Pythagoras, or Aristotle. While you're doing that, Tegan, and pulling up our poll, I'd just like to sort of reiterate back on our this question that came up around soft skills and that importance, that, we try to integrate those public speaking and leadership skills into all of our programs, because one of the things that we notice is that people really do need a good bit of practice with these things. And with that practice comes confidence. Just this week, just yesterday, we were doing interviewing skills with our students, and we'll be doing a resume workshop with them tomorrow. So these are ways that they can practice. Tegan, can we have the answers to that poll?
So overwhelmingly, we have a lot of folks on the poll who happen to know a good bit about philosophers. This is Socrates, and this is important because the Socratic method is what we use when we teach and how we teach. Can we go to the next slide, please? So we use Socratic method education. I've already mentioned it's problem-based. When we teach a concept, we give a problem, and we have our students work toward a solution. That working toward the solution is done first by reading a case study, second by reflecting on it, third by coming to class and being in a discussion, fourth on being a part of that guided discussion to a solution, but then also we want them to think about it after they're out of class. What we're trying to do is push on critical thinking, getting people to think two things. There is an answer, but that answer is solved just like everyday life, not by listening to an instructor or going to a textbook, but by talking it through. But also that the answer, the collective knowledge of the room, is greater than any knowledge of any individual. The answer is in the room. Now, what this calls on instructors to do, and we do train at Resilience Education on how to do this, is the instructor is more of a conductor. The instructor asks questions rather than provide answers. And, not everyone is always ready to speak, so one of the things we do is a cold call. That is, someone who's sitting and doesn't have a hand raised, we say, hey, what do you think? And we try to structure conversations to ensure there's lots of involvement from many, many different people in the room. Next slide.
So one of the things that we can talk about is the types of things that our students say. We recently did some feedback, requested some feedback, and did a survey of our participants that are in our current classes. And these are some of the feedback that we got, and it's very consistent with feedback that we've gotten over time. One of the things, as Greg was mentioning, they say it's helpful to have class discussions and hear different perspectives. Finding a solution to the problem helps to generate creative and critical thinking. That is really important. They feel like the case method in the second bullet allows people to be open to various ways to solve business decisions. And that's where that person up in the front of the room, the facilitator or instructor, is really helping to bring out all those different ideas. The third bullet, is talking about looking at the way you can see different aspects of business and actually stops and has people think more. We think that engaging different people in the room and utilizing their own expertise and asking them very targeted and structured questions helps them to look at different aspects of a problem. And finally, this last bullet I like a lot, as the person sort of says that they like the case studies instead of textbooks because it makes the course seem more real life. And the case studies make them feel like they're some type of consultant. And that's kind of how we structure these case studies, is that in fact they are really putting themselves in the shoes of that protagonist, that person with the business problem, and they're coming across and trying to provide those solutions. And we feel and we find that this is very engaging, and in fact in our programs that we just have started with some juveniles, they felt the same way. They felt the real life practical applications was going to be very helpful to them. Next slide, please.
So in our current programs, one of the questions some of you may be thinking about is who should do the teaching. In our programs, we use really a number of different stakeholders that are helpful. First of all, we pull on content knowledge experts. Since we're teaching business skills that would relate to how well someone was ready to be a lendee, we pull on content knowledge experts. We train them in the Socratic method. Some of them are already trained in that way. And we find people who are willing to give of their time. Paid instructors are great. Volunteer instructors in some ways are more dedicated. That sounds odd for me to say as a professor, but I can say it. MBA students, we use alumni of our business school and other business schools. Business professionals and entrepreneurs are our general groups we source instructors from. Next slide. And then the other thought for those on the room is finding a partner. What's the end goal, and where do you sit in a chain, a supply chain? Are you good at related services? Are you an educator, an employer, or a lender? All of these partners add value. Knowing where you add the most value and where you might build assistance from someone else is what we've tried to do here in our work, and we'd recommend. We, of course, are experts in education. Next slide. So when we think about partnerships, we think about interconnected partners who recognize that the ultimate goal being reentry. Each of the partners might think of different ways to be helpful, and each might have different skills, but that on their own, they're probably not able to provide as much value to those they're attempting to help. For those lenders on the phone, an educational program that augments your work is probably a good idea. It may be prior to a lendee coming to work with you. It may be during the period in which a lendee comes to work. As I think about it and I say this, some of your lendees might become instructors to help others. These are the types of programs and the types of creative thinking that we think leads to a more holistic approach to this problem.
So I think we would just end on, and this is the close of our webinar today, with just a simple question of, which partners do you think would be most helpful to you in lending to ex-offenders in your community? I don't know, Tegan, if we can start with that as a question out to everyone, so those that may want to respond with using their notes, and then we would invite questions Other questions, and Tegan, I'll turn it over to you to help us with that.
Here's our contact information for any of you that are on the line. If we don't get a chance to take your question today, we'd love to hear from you. Bob Newman has a question, and Bob would like to know whether representatives of city, county, federal, state government are responsible for ex-offenders returning to society. You know, I don't know whether responsible is the right word. I will say this. I will say that if we think about the notion that the public safety officers, the governor of any state, the president of the United States is always thinking about in which ways is a correction system correcting. And when we think about that notion and we take it seriously, then it is in the best interest of the public that reentry is something that's done as effectively as it can be. I think one of the things that we often forget is that 90% of all currently incarcerated folks will be reentered to society at some point. And so the notion is that I'm not sure where the responsibility lies. I think it's all of ours, but we certainly would anticipate that our governments would have a significant interest in lowering recidivism and facilitating reentry.
I can certainly say, I'm sensing here, at least in this, in our community and in Virginia, that you have, more of an interest in looking at helping people to engage in effectively in successful employment opportunities, and whether that is through work release programs with our jail that we have, or that's providing coordination around what jobs are available for people in the community, or connecting with vocational or technical high schools, community colleges, and major employers. Yes, I've seen the cities that we are in this area engage, and I think we may see more of that. And I think we may need to reach out and make sure that our cities, our states are looking at the communities and the needs that we might have from the employment and lending communities in order to help people be most successful. Is there another question?
I'm not showing any other questions at this time.
Well, it looks like people are signing off. Let's leave it as thank you again for your time. Thank you again for your interest. We want to turn it back over to the SBA, and if you would like to be in touch with us, our contact information is here. Thank you so much, Grady Hedgesbeth, and everyone who's been so helpful at the SBA.
Well, thank you very much, and this is James Webb at the SBA, and I've stepped in for Daniel Upman and for Grady. And first, we want to start by thanking Gregory and Tierney Fairchild for providing these 3 webinars that it's over 3 hours of information. And again, I would say that the word that constantly came up was opportunity. And we are so very happy that we had the opportunity to have the Fairchilds provide kind of an overview and or a framework for intermediaries looking to take advantage of lending within the reentry population that, really is a market that has been presented to us today, and a framework of how maybe best to approach that market. So thank you for that opportunity, and to work on the other phrase of building on what we've already done here. As Greg pointed out, their contact information is right there, and I have no doubt that each and every one of these webinars and subject matters would have additional drill down, and that, if we can't answer your questions, or if you have a specific question for the Fairchilds, please feel free to reach out to them. We here at the SBA plan on continuing doing additional webinars, not just on reentry education and or lending, but other subjects as well. So I really want to thank everybody for holding on, and I know this particular presentation was a little late, but feel free to spread the word. We did record this, as was noted before, and you can reach me at james.webb with 2 B's at sba.gov, and we'll be happy to send you a recording. We'll also be sending out the PowerPoint slides again for everybody, so that they can have a complete set of webinar 1, 2, and 3. And if you missed any of the previous webinars, we do have those already on record, so we can send them out, and hopefully eventually we'll have a link that you can just go to. But for now, again, you can contact myself at james.webb with 2 B's at sba.gov, and I'll be happy to send that out, as well as any questions you may have regarding this series and or microlending in general. So again, I want to thank everybody that gave us their time today, and especially again to Tierney and Greg for this great presentation and really introducing a market that was not previously available until our final rule came out just this past year, that allowed us to really clearly address this untapped market of microlending. So again, thank you all, and appreciate your time today.